Tonight, former President Trump will join Elon Musk on the billionaire's social media platform X for a sit-down interview. While Musk may seem like an unconventional pick to interview Trump, this is an ongoing push by the billionaire Tesla founder to enter the political fray. Earlier this year, Musk started America PAC with Republican donor Richard Weekley with the goal of turning out 800,000 people to vote for Trump in battleground states. It's part of a major sign that Trump and Elon Musk have set their past differences aside, teaming up to take on the Harris campaign and reach an audience outside of Trump's conservative base. Joining me now is The Hill's White House reporter Brett Samuels to help break down what we can expect to see tonight. Brett, it's always great to see you. Elon Musk and Trump haven't always had the warmest relationship. In fact, back in 2022, Musk tweeted that it's time for former President Trump to hang up his hat, and Trump has been a very vocal critic of electric cars, putting the two at odds in terms of business. But with this sit-down interview, is Musk making a significant push into the political world, and really what can we expect to see out of Trump tonight?
Yeah, Julia, this is definitely a pretty significant development in the relationship between former President Trump and Elon Musk. Trump left Twitter, as it was formerly known, after he was banned following the January 6th riots in 2021, and Elon Musk bought the platform. Trump has sort of eased his way back onto the platform under Musk's ownership. He posted for the first time last August. He actually started posting again a few times in the lead up to this interview on Monday night with Elon Musk. And I think, the expectation is that this is going to be a fairly freewheeling, open conversation between Trump and Musk. It's not going to be some kind of traditional sort of journalistic sit down. Musk himself has sort of promoted some conservative ideas and at times kind of trafficked in conspiracy theories in ways that Trump also has. So I think that Musk is somebody who Trump feels comfortable with, and the Trump team feels like he's somebody who has this huge following that by sitting down with him, they can potentially reach a pretty wide audience.
He does. And in fact, last year, we saw that Ron DeSantis launched his presidential bid on X with Elon Musk. Wasn't the smoothest of interviews in terms of technical issues, but maybe Elon Musk and the X team have sort of smoothed those out in the years since. So I want to switch gears a little bit. There are new developments in Trump's classified documents case after lawyers for the former president filed a $100 million claim with the Justice Department over its search of Mar-a-Lago. Trump's legal team is accusing the DOJ of hurting Trump's reputation in its filing. But Brett, how much of a legal standing does Trump have with this claim, and why are they asserting this amount of damages now?
Yeah, so, on the timing, it actually comes just a day before this deadline would have closed, where Trump would have had a couple years to file this claim. So he's just getting it in just under the wire, where he's making this $100 million claim against the Justice Department. As for, the chances of this going anywhere, I would say it's fairly slim. We've seen the former president and his legal team really try and challenge this search of Mar-a-Lago that happened a couple years ago as part of this classified documents investigation. They've tried to challenge the legality of it. They've tried to get this case, thrown out on the grounds of this search. And courts had repeatedly upheld the search as legal. And in fact, a federal judge in Florida had signed off on the search when it happened. So, while Trump continues to rail against this case that Judge Eileen Cannon had actually thrown out a few weeks ago, his chances of recovering the damages that he's seeking are pretty unlikely, I would say.
So over the weekend, the Trump campaign announced that it had been hacked after several news outlets received emails from an anonymous account with documents from inside the campaign. Trump posted on Truth Social claiming that Iran was behind the attack. Brett, what do we know about what these insider documents, why they were sent, who they were sent to, and is this a sign of increased election interference from foreign adversaries in the 2024 cycles?
Yeah, so, these documents, as you mentioned, that were sent around to a handful of media outlets, mostly focused on some vetting materials into JD Vance, the Ohio senator, who was, of course, eventually chosen just a few weeks ago as Trump's running mate. So, these documents essentially were a look into how the Trump campaign was vetting JD Vance, some of the information that they had gathered on him, on his past comments, past policy positions, his personal life, things of that nature that they were taking into account much earlier in the vetting process as they weighed whether to add him to the ticket. So, that's sort of the first that we've seen of this sort of this hack that the Trump campaign has blamed on Iran. And as far as, whether we can expect to see more of it, I think the answer is yes. Experts experts have signaled that this is the type of thing that we can expect to see in the sort of 3 months that we have leading up to November here. Obviously, in 2016, with the WikiLeaks, Hillary's emails coming out of WikiLeaks, Hillary Clinton's emails. We saw that in 2016. In 2020, we saw more attempts by foreign adversaries to, including Iran, to, sort of influence the U.S. election. So I think this is, a trend that we're going to continue to see both this election and elections moving forward.
And Brett, over on the campaign trail, specifically polls, a new poll from the New York Times and Siena College shows Vice President Kamala Harris has taken the lead in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Republican pollster Frank Luntz has suggested that Trump's persona is factoring into the former president's drop in the polls. Brett, what is the Trump campaign saying about the latest numbers? And with the swing states back in play, will the Trump campaign make any shift in its strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely fair to say that, Vice President Harris, her sort of surge as she replaced President Biden atop the Democratic ticket has really rattled former President Trump. He's really clearly kind of struggled to stay on message and find a message that works in attacking her. He sort of had all these self-created controversies where he attacked her over her biracial heritage. He attacked Brian Kemp, the Georgia governor, during an Atlanta rally instead of focusing on Harris. And then over the weekend, we saw him push this conspiracy theory that Harris's rally crowds were somehow fabricated or created by artificial intelligence images. So Trump does seem to be reeling quite a bit. And I think part of that is because, Harris has seen this rise in the polls. You mentioned that New York Times poll that showed Harris leading Trump by 4 percentage points in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Those are 3 states that Trump won in 2016, then lost in 2020, and are going to be really pivotal this November in determining the outcome. Other polls have shown Harris sort of consolidating support among Democrats, gaining on Trump, wiping out the lead he had against President Biden. The Trump campaign has kind of brushed those off. They've said, that this is just a honeymoon phase for Harris, that eventually she's going to, stumble and come back down to earth, and the race will sort of even out from there, and maybe Trump may pull ahead even. But, until that happens, in the meantime, Trump really does seem to be kind of struggling to find his footing and struggling to find a working message that Republicans can rally behind.
Brett, Trump took to Truth Social over the weekend, accusing the Harris campaign of using AI fake images of crowd sizes, and the Harris campaign was quick to respond, calling out the former president and accusing him of having low energy. Now, Brett, you and I know that these allegations are easily debunked. There's videos, photos. We know that many of our colleagues in the press have been at these events. But what is Trump's strategy here? Is this a sign he's struggling to come up with a strong attack on Harris? Or does it set the groundwork for denying election results? I mean, it seems like a lot of Republicans today are worried that he's so laser focused on crowd sizes, but not focused on, the economy or policy differences that he has with Harris.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a combination of both those things you mentioned, Julia. Both this idea that he's kind of struggling to find a working line of attack against Vice President Harris, a consistent message on issues like the economy and immigration. He sort of sporadically will go after Harris on those issues and then get caught up on attacks on her personality or gripes about the polls or crowd size. And on the other hand, I think, to your point, it is sort of laying this groundwork to sort of call into question Harris's support ahead of November. We've also heard him talk about how this idea that whether she was unconstitutionally made the Democratic nominee. And of course, that is also not true. Joe Biden was never officially crowned the Democratic nominee or voted as a Democratic nominee. And Vice President Harris was just recently voted by delegates as a Democratic nominee. So that, undercuts that claim from Trump. But this is the kind of rhetoric, that I think some of Trump's critics are particularly worried about, that he could be laying the foundation in November to just reject any kind of loss, that he could be citing whether Harris is running unconstitutionally. He could be citing whether Harris's crowds are really there as big as they're being reported. So certainly I think it's a combination of him kind of flailing and struggling to find a message, but also, just planting these seeds of doubt in people's mind a few months ahead of the election.
I want to turn to the JD Vance front, because we know over the weekend he was on the Sunday show circuit, appearing on multiple news outlets. On CNN, he was pressed over his attacks on Tim Walz's military record and Trump's medical deferment to avoid the Vietnam draft. Has his strategy of going after Walz here failed to resonate with voters?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a fair question. This is sort of the main line of attack that Republicans have settled on against Governor Walz. And again, to your earlier point about these questions about policy, I think Republicans could be going after Tim Walz on issues of, some of the laws he signed as governor, protecting gender affirming care for transgender youth, or if they want to attack him over some of the economic policies or his handling of the 2020 riots after George Floyd's killing in Minneapolis. But instead, this seems to be what they're going after Tim Walz on, is this question of whether he, skirted his duty somehow by resigning from the National Guard just a few months before his unit deployed overseas. Folks have come to Tim Walz's defense, including folks who he served with, to say, that he put in his resignation before it was known where they would be deploying. And it does seem like this attack is not really sticking or resonating with voters. And it's certainly not overtaking the messaging from the Harris campaign, where they've been able to draw, more than 10,000 people basically at these rallies that they've held in Arizona and Nevada, Pennsylvania, Michigan, in these battleground states. So, I think it's something that JD Vance, who himself served in the Marines, they're going to keep hammering on because they feel like, Tim Walz shouldn't get a free pass here. But it's yet to seemingly really put a dent in the momentum that the Harris and Walz campaign has enjoyed.
Right, right. And we know that Vance has accused Democrats of schoolyard bullying. But at the same time, he seems to be using similar attacks on the Democratic ticket. I mean, I'm thinking childless cat ladies, for example, even though he made those comments in 2021. But I mean, is that sort of that line of attack saying they're schoolyard bullying? I mean, does that fall flat?
Yeah, I think, when you're running on a ticket with former President Trump, I think that's very much a hard line to sell. It's very much kind of the pot calling the kettle black, where,
Yeah.
Trump, who since 2016, since he burst on the political scene, his whole deal was, branding his opponents with nicknames. He's done the same with Vice President Harris, and he's questioned her racial heritage and saying that she happened to turn black when, of course, she's been black and Indian American for her entire life. So I think for JD Vance to kind of say that it's out of bounds for Democrats to call him weird, or whatever insults they may be lobbing at him, that's just sort of the state of our politics today. I think it's a hard sell for JD Vance to say that that's out of bounds somehow.
So on the Democratic vice presidential front, Tim Walz is hitting the campaign trail solo this week. He's heading to 5 states in a massive fundraising swing. Brett, how much of a test is this for the VP nominee on the Democratic side, and where is he going?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, it'll be Tim Walz's first time out on the stump, raising money, speaking to donors, without Vice President Harris by his side. Obviously, they had this huge sort of tour of the battleground states their first week as running mates together. But now Tim Walz is going to head out on his own. He'll be in California, he'll be in Rhode Island, he'll be in the Hamptons in New York. So sort of, crisscrossing the country basically to raise money for the Harris Walz campaign, but also to try and keep this momentum going at a time when, as we talked about previously, Harris has risen in the polls. She's seen a lot of an influx of donors, an influx of volunteers for her campaign. People were excited about Tim Walz being named to the ticket last week. And now this is his chance, while Vice President Harris is in Washington for a good chunk of this week. This is a chance for Tim Walz to kind of branch out on his own and see if he can, sustain that momentum on his own.
So looking back at Walz's time in the House of Representatives, how much do you think it helped him prepare him for, the political waters of the campaign trail? I mean, our colleague Emily Brooks and our colleagues who cover the House regularly have done a lot of reporting on this, and it seems like, there's been a push by, his former colleagues, to very much prepare him for this moment.
Absolutely. He, as Emily Brooks, as you mentioned, as she wrote, Tim Walz has sort of he during his career in the House as a 6-term member of Congress was able to navigate very difficult political waters. He obviously was first elected in a Republican district where he defeated a Republican incumbent. So his time in the House, he was able to both, ascend to be the top Democrat on the Veterans Affairs Committee in the House. He was also able to take some tough votes, around Obamacare, around the Iran nuclear deal. And at the same time, he won over a lot of his colleagues. He was very well liked. So, Certainly his time in the House has, as you said, prepared him well for this moment as vice president. And I think on top of that, his having served in the House for 6 terms, it makes him a pretty strong complement to Vice President Harris, who obviously served in the Senate, and may not have quite as strong of relationships with some of the Democrats on the House side, like Tim Walz might, should they be elected.
The Democratic National Committee launched its first advertising blitz promoting Vice President Harris and Governor Walz on their new presidential ticket. Where is the major focus of this ad campaign?
Yeah, so we're seeing, ads, billboards, all kinds of media promotion from the DNC, mostly in battleground states. We're looking at Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, obviously a big focus, but also, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, also going to be big focuses of these campaigns. And that comes on the heels of the Harris campaign, pledging $50 million in its own ad campaign spending ahead of the Democratic National Convention that starts up next week. So they're up with ads in those same battleground states, touting Vice President Harris's, record as an attorney general, prosecuting border gangs, drug cartels, things of that nature, as well as promoting her background, being raised in a middle-class family, working at McDonald's while she was in college, things of that sort. So between the DNC and the vice president's campaign, we're seeing this really major push, I think, in the lead up to the DNC to really kind of get the word out about her candidacy, sort of introduce her to voters so that, if they tune in at the DNC next week, they see her on their TV screens. They're already familiar from these ads with some of her positions and some of her background.
So moving over to the Middle East and switching gears to foreign policy, an Israeli airstrike over the weekend hit a school in Gaza, killing about 100 people, according to Palestinian officials. While Israel said it targeted the school because Hamas fighters were sheltering in the building, this is obviously a major blow to the ongoing ceasefire negotiations. Where are those talks now, and could we see any movement towards a ceasefire fall apart after this latest strike?
Yeah, we heard from President Biden just recently, and John Kirby, a spokesperson for the White House, where just a few days ago they were saying that, a ceasefire deal, that they were closer than they'd ever been to an agreement. And then you have this shelling happening, in Gaza. And it's just sort of the latest example, I think, of, folks are going to question whether both sides, and Israel in particular in this case, whether they really want a ceasefire deal, whether that's something they're actually committed to getting. So the U.S. White House officials are certainly going to keep working on this ceasefire deal. They're trying to bring together the two sides, Hamas and Israel, and mediators in the coming days to see if they can hammer out some kind of final agreement. But certainly this bombing that you mentioned that targeted a school, that's just going to add sort of skepticism, I think, from Hamas about whether Israel is actually interested in this kind of ceasefire. We've been told by the White House so many times how close they've been to a ceasefire agreement that it's one of those things that until it actually happens, until, there's pen to paper on this kind of deal, I think it's hard to really be certain that anything is going to get done.
And as tensions have hit some of the highest levels in the Middle East after the assassination of a Hamas leader in Iran, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has ordered a guided missile submarine to the region. Brett, how worried is the White House about an all-out war if Iran retaliates in the coming days?
So the White House has, ever since that assassination of the top Hamas leader in Iran, as you mentioned, the White House has tried to insist that cooler heads will prevail, tried to downplay the idea that there will be some kind of wider war in the Middle East sparked by this. They've been adamant that that's not what this needs to come to. It doesn't need to escalate to that level. At the same time, as you mentioned, the Pentagon is sending support to the region. John Kirby just today, Monday morning, was telling reporters that they are expecting Iran may respond to Israel and retaliate sometime this week with an attack of their own. So things are very fraught. I think things are very tense, and all sides are kind of on the lookout for some kind of response from Iran. But the question is after that, if things move on and cooler heads prevail, or if that does, as you mentioned, Julia, lead to some kind of wider conflict that the White House is concerned about.
Absolutely. We'll be watching that situation and, all of the wild political news happening. Brett Samuels, as always, thank you so much for joining us to break it all down.
Thanks, Julia.
The House task force formed to investigate the assassination attempt against former President Trump is demanding documents and briefings from the key agencies involved in the investigation. In its first official moves, the task force sent letters Monday to Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, Acting Secret Service Director Ronald Rowe, Attorney General Merrick Garland, and FBI Director Christopher Wray, asking for all documents related to the assassination attempt. The House Oversight Committee already held a hearing on the incident. That hearing led Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle to resign. A final report is expected from the task force in December. A new farm bill provision would permanently block the transfer of 9,500 acres from the federal government to two different Native American tribes. The land is home to the United States Department of Agriculture research facility. Oklahoma Representative Frank Lucas introduced the provision to preserve and expand agricultural and climate research. Previous iterations of the provision set or extended an expiration date after which it would transfer the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes who have fought for their claim to the land for more than a century. Lucas's version does away with the expiration, meaning that only an act of Congress could initiate a transfer of the land. Cheyenne and Arapaho leaders, as well as members of the USDA, say that the move undoes decades of progress the tribes have made to reclaim the contested land. Automaker Stellantis announced over the weekend that it will be laying off as many as 2,400 workers later this year. The car manufacturing company behind big brands like Jeep and Ram announced that it would be discontinuing production of the Ram 1500 Classic at their factory outside of Detroit. The company says as many as 2,450 workers are likely to be impacted, but says the actual number will likely be lower. It comes a little less than a year after the United Auto Workers Union led a 6-week-long strike against the big three automakers. Layoffs could begin as early as October 8th. Former President Donald Trump's campaign is in hot water for using multiple musicians' work without their permission. The family of late soul singer Isaac Hayes filed a suit against the campaign on Sunday after former president used his song "Hold On, I'm Comin'" at rallies over the last 2 years. It was most recently used at Trump's Bozeman, Montana rally last week, where he also played Celine Dion's "My Heart Will Go On." Also denounced by the artist, Dion posted to social media that the use of her 1997 hit was in no way authorized. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Julia Manchester. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.